The Exorcist made people faint in the theater when it came out in 1973, but how does it come across to somebody watching it for the first time in 2024? Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Idlestone podcast. Daniel, can you explain to the people what we're doing today?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. In honor of Halloween, we're talking about The Exorcist from 1973, which has the reputation for being one of the scariest movies ever made and one of the best movies ever made, period. So I've seen this movie a couple of times now. I think I saw it for the first time about 2 years ago and have seen it maybe 3 or 4 times since then. And you've just seen it for the first time, right? So what's your overall impression and takeaway from The Exorcist?
I will never watch this movie again. And not because it's a bad movie, but because, again, I already don't like horror as it is, but like the concept of the exorcism just, I don't know, it just like completely like freaked me out. So the entire time like I'm watching the movie, I'm watching it like behind my hands and just like probably missing a lot as well, but just like completely like unsettled from like minute one. I just this is one that I was like dreading because like we've done other like scary movies and stuff like that, but there's just something about like these like Exorcist like type movies that just don't sit right for me, and just like. And like just to add some context to it as well. So I was gonna watch it over the week with my partner, but she was very much against it. She hates horror movies completely. So then I had to watch it when she'd kind of gone away and I was in the house by myself. So I chose not to watch it at nighttime. And I was like, I'm only watching this during the day. And even then, it's just, man, like I just couldn't settle watching this. And again, it's probably like people will probably like watch this and be like, this is like, not the like scariest movie, not the goriest movie, but it's just like the concept of like this little girl being like spiritually possessed by like a demon, and you can like see like this demon's like more and more like taking over her. And like sometimes you see in like other possession movies, you see like the spirits like kind of like taking over the person, but only that person like kind of like is aware of it. But then in this one, the demon's like pretty much like just like out there for like everyone to see, kind of like throwing things about the room and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't think this one's completely for me for that particular reason. And again, not to say that it's a bad movie. I know it's a very well made movie, but I think this, like we've done a lot of like horror movies this past month, and I think this one's pushed me to the edge pretty much.
I was looking forward to talking about this one because throughout the year, every time you've said you don't like horror movies, or you didn't enjoy a horror movie we talked about, I said, before you write off the entire genre, at least give Exorcist a try, right? Yeah. Because that one is number one of the best, or has the reputation for being one of the best, and it's also very different from most horror movies, I think. So I was really curious to get your reaction to it. So what was it specific? So is it just that it's a possession and there's an exorcism and that weirds you out, or what was it?
I think it's the like close ties to religion that this has, especially kind of like coming from like a bit of a Christian background myself. It almost feels too real, and I think a common thing that you say is that a good thing, like a good horror, is meant to kind of like remind you of like a real world type of like threat or something like that, something that you're actually like scared of in real life. So for like Nights with earlier, it was like potentially like drowning in the pool, and this one just felt like it was something that could happen. Even like now, I feel like uncomfortable to say, like even like just like talking about it. It just really kind of freaked me out, especially. And you see those videos of like people supposedly being possessed in like church and stuff like that, and you've got like the preachers like preaching over them. And for the most part, it does seem nonsense, but there's just something about this that kind of like triggers something in me that makes it feel more real than probably what it even is in this. And again, I've watched like other movies where there is like possessions in there, or like someone's like kind of like, we watched that Vietnamese or like the Asian one earlier this year. I can't remember what it's called. And that had like
one, Indonesian horror movie about somebody comes back from the dead, essentially.
So yeah, so that one had like that element to it. But I really feel like it's like the close ties to like kind of like the religion in this, and like having like the priest there and stuff like that, that just triggered something in me that I didn't really know was probably there. before watching this.
You're not Catholic, right? To you, like when you see a Catholic priest doing their thing, like that's the other guy, right? That doesn't cut that close to home, right?
Not completely, but I've never kind of like seen like religion like Christianity as like Catholic where I know that there's been like conflicts over it, but I just kind of like see like religion as like religion, or Christianity.
But like you were not raised in Catholic mass, that sort of thing. That's kind of
No,
what I'm
no, yeah, no, I wasn't raised in like that type of mass, but it's still, still has some like loose connections in there.
Because I've heard this in other horror movies, like there's this Taiwanese movie Incantation that essentially is about what if you break every rule of Buddhism, right? I think it's Buddhism, I'm not 100% sure, but basically if you're raised in that culture, you are taught certain rules about what not to do and what will attract bad fortune and what will attract evil spirits. And the characters in these movies, through their arrogance, do all of those things. And then you see the consequences. And so I've heard from people, if you are brought up in that tradition, that movie really hits close to home because you see everything happen that your grandparents told you never to do, right? So I imagine The Exorcist has a similar effect if you grew up Catholic, for instance, right? Which neither of us did, right? But you said it felt real, right? So I'm interested in why you think that was. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but the director who made this, so this is adapted from a book, and the author who wrote the book, so the author is William Peter Blatty, and he essentially wrote the story, and then he wrote the screenplay for it, and then he gave that to the director William Friedkin, who number one is not Christian, and number two is a documentary filmmaker. And so he approached this from the point of view of, what if this was real? And I want to make this seem as real as possible. And you can see this in the way it's shot, right? There's very little soundtrack. There is soundtrack, but like when we see the demon and we see the priests doing their thing, there is no music over it. It's just the noises they make, right? So there's nothing, like the movie is not telling you how to feel through the soundtrack and stuff like that, right? There's no ominous music that's supposed to get you in the mood and things like that. And it's also shot in a very matter-of-fact way, right? It's just camera on Reagan, for instance, or on the priests. And it's just, like the movie does not use any tricks to make it seem more dramatic, right? Do you think that had something to do with it?
Yeah, I definitely noticed the lack of music. And again, like in watching sort of modern movie, you definitely are told how to feel by sort of sound in that. And yeah, like more so away from like kind of like how it was like shot, in terms of like kind of like the realism of sort of what was like happening and how it was like unfolding as well, in terms of like the concern that the mother had, especially like for the time, in terms of like the ways that she was like kind of like seeking out for help and stuff like that. It all seemed like very real and like very like how it would actually play out. And yeah, like you're saying, like even like down to like the kind of like the design of it and stuff like that. It just like really felt like it just kind of felt like this was like this little girl, like kind of completely being taken over, and the way like she was like kind of like acting, and the way that like the voice was even like kind of coming out of her as well. It just like all felt way too like real in that instance, and the way it was like kind of like mocking them at certain times as well.
This movie famously, when it came out, made people faint in the theater, and people by the dozens had to be carried out of the movie theater and stuff like that. And when you see interviews with them, they're just completely freaked out, like they've seen like they've just seen the most terrible thing ever. And that kind of gave it the reputation for being the scariest movie ever made, right? When I watched it for the first time 2 years ago, I went in expecting like the goriest, most disturbing imagery I've ever seen. Like I'm not really into like gross out horror, like body horror and that sort of thing. Like if somebody's being mutilated or something, like I'm out of there. Like I don't like it, right? I'm not getting any enjoyment out of it. Like I was expecting stuff like that, right? Like truly disturbing stuff, and there isn't really, right? Like it's not that kind of scary.
No, definitely not. I mean, you have like definitely some like creepy scenes, like when she's like walking down the stairs like backwards and she's got like the blood all over her face. That's like definitely creepy. And like I can imagine for the time as well, we kind of grew up in and we've seen like loads of special effects and stuff like that now. But I can even imagine like when she's like when her head's like completely like fully turned on her body and stuff like that, and like even some of like the like gross stuff like she was like spewing out. I can imagine like it being scary for the time, but it's all I feel like for me it's all in the way that the movie like makes you feel as opposed to like what it's shown you.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I kind of like spoke about like it being like unsettling and sort of it just like having this like kind of like ominous like feeling about it like the entire time that you're watching it. And even when they're trying to sort of get the spirit out of her, like the two priests that were in the room, and sort of you have that scene where she's like kind of like levitating above the bed and this and the other, and he's like, and before that he's like throwing holy water on her, like all of that just like feels very intense. Like that whole like sequence is just like really, really intense.
This movie really has its effect once you kind of buy into what it's trying to do as opposed to what you think it's trying to do, right? Because if you've seen other movies about exorcisms, they kind of launch right into it. Like there's the possessed person, there's the priest, there's the pea soup vomit, the spinning heads, the floating above the bed, like all of these images that are in this movie. But the bulk of this movie, I think, is very different, right? Like we don't actually see the exorcism until well over an hour into the movie. And I think that is kind of why audiences who know who know the exorcism genre kind of go in with expectations that kind of negates like the actual horror of this movie, which I think is a mother is stuck in a strange town, right? They're not from Georgetown, right? They're renting this house. They're surrounded by strangers. She's working a lot there. She's just separated from the father, right? And now her child is getting sick. And she's trying to help, but she can't figure it out. And none of the experts, none of the doctors can help her. I think that is the horror of the story. Yeah. Like, did you latch onto that, or like what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, no, I think I mentioned it. And actually, sorry, one thing that I was like kind of questioned was actually that it was one of the doctors that suggested for her to reach out to a priest. I was like, okay. I was a bit like, someone that's like, a doctor or whatever like that would probably more believe in actual like practicalities of things. I know for like a long time that they were like emphasizing something like some type of like mental disorder on her. But again, that like you're saying, that like really adds to the horror of this, in terms of, one, it's like firstly like the mother kind of like understanding and like believing like her daughter, and like having to like kind of like see something like the torment that she's kind of going through, and then the torment of like trying to like relay what's going on to these like healthcare professionals. And there's like this like kind of like pushback, because like everything kind of has to make sense, and like this like little girl kind of being possessed or whatever doesn't correlate to like the real world to them, and like isn't of the norm. So it's also like that feeling of like helplessness and stuff like that that just like sort of like really adds to sort of the sort of building of tension throughout this movie.
And notably, the mother is not Christian, right? She does not believe in exorcisms in the first place.
Yeah.
So she doesn't come from this like there are other movies, right, where somebody like there's something spiritual going on, and the doctors are trying to kind of talk the person out of it, right? They're saying, oh no, this is just superstition, like there's a rational explanation for this, and so on. And this time the mother is on the side of the doctors, right? They together want to figure out what's wrong with Reagan, and they just can't find anything. And they're going through all of these ordeals, right? Like I actually think the scariest scene is the medical stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say actually, it's like when they're putting that thing in like her throat or whatever like that. I was very screaming when I was
spinal tap. Yeah. And like the MRI is not much better, right? Like 70s medicine, pretty rudimentary, right? And pretty scary. And everybody's trying to kind of put Reagan at ease, and everybody's genuinely trying to help. Nobody is mean. Nobody is cruel, and it's still terrifying. And so it's bad for Reagan, and it's worse arguably for the mother, because she has to watch, and she doesn't know if it will ever get better, or if she's about to lose her child, right? That part is actually scarier than the actual possession, I think.
Yeah, I can agree on that. I think the scariest part of the possession, kind of like you said, come later in the movie, when like her face is like fully deformed, and sort of the spirits like completely like start to take over her body and stuff like that. But no, definitely the stuff with like the mother, it's just like it speaks to the desperation of like sort of that she eventually had to turn to sort of this religious aspect of it, because she's gone through everything that would have made sense to her, and then it's a bit like that last hope, that last bit of effort to try and save her daughter and try and get her back.
Yeah, and the priest tries to talk her out of it, right? The priest basically says, have you talked to a doctor? Maybe you should do that first, right?
Yeah.
And then she just snaps at him and says, look, they sent me to you, now you're sending me to them. Like, can somebody just help me? And that's what kind of where the real desperation comes out, right? Before, it's all very rational, very calm, very methodical, very trusting, right? Like, this will all work out. We just have to do the right thing, and then everything will get better. But it's not, right? Nothing they're doing is helping. And then one by one, she's kind of ruling out all the possibilities, and then she's left with the impossible, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And didn't they say, if I remember correctly, that there was like they hadn't done an Exorcist in a very long time? Yeah. And what was like the reason for that? Was it just kind of like, I don't, yeah, what was like?
The attitude is it's not real. Like, this is not something this is something we did before we knew about psychiatry and about, the brain and stuff like that. And like, the church has essentially abandoned this practice. And like, some people are trained in it like for historical reasons. They go into this whole thing about how the church doesn't actually know how to help, really. Like, they have to really dig deep to find somebody who can do an exorcism. And then they find this Indiana Jones type, right? Who has been going on archaeological digs in Iraq and who did an exorcism in Africa once, that kind of thing, right? Like, the guy's, that's not a normal priest.
No,
right? They have to really go all out to find somebody who can do it. And that kind of touches into like one of the big themes of this movie, which is institutions. Like, this is a bigger theme in the sequel. So there's like 5 sequels, and one of them is good. Exorcist 3, maybe we'll get to that one day, and that was really explicit about the institutions. But I think the idea is still here that there you have got the doctors, you've got the psychiatrists, you've got the church, you've got the police, right? You've got the priests. Everybody is trying to help, and they are all useless, right? And but everybody trusts in these institutions and these authorities, and they are just baffled, like they're just stumped.
Yeah, and it's almost like the blind faith in, especially like the healthcare aspect of it, where like the mother's just kind of like going for something, like everything that they're suggesting in terms of because she believes that they know best. She believes like they kind of have, well, I mean, they do have the best interest at heart, but like she just believes and is like very trusting of like kind of like what they're saying, and then in doing so, she's putting her daughter through all of these different ordeals, which isn't actually like curing
which under normal circumstances would be the right thing to do, right? But this is just the one time where it's not helping.
Yeah, where it's like So what do you think they were trying to say in terms of like highlighting all these different institutions and because essentially they're like, apart from the church and the priests, they're all very much ineffective in trying to save her.
Yeah. So I think a really big part of this is just, what if this was real? Like, what if somebody can just be possessed by a demon? And like, then what happens? And what do you do if that happens to your child? Like, I think that's the basic impulse that gets explored in this story. And that then touches on this whole idea of, what if your child is sick and you can't help? Yeah. Right? Because I think that is a really universal fear that I think any parent can relate to, where something's wrong, but you don't know what. And then you try to help and it doesn't work. I'm sure at some point, like, you have this fear of, what if nothing works, right? Or what if this is it, right? And that's kind of this writ large. Like, this has made this kind of very explicit and very extreme, because there really is nobody's doing anything wrong in this, right? Everybody's doing what they're supposed to, and it's still not good enough. I think that's the core of the horror here that this taps into. And I think that's the reason why it's the only good exorcism movie I know. So I think there's a few, like Exorcist 3 is good. And there was this Amazon series about The Exorcist that essentially was 2 seasons. And each season it follows one possession case. And they're quite different cases. And it's a pretty good story because it's about something, and it's well done, and it's well written, and it's an intelligent story and stuff like that. But as far as I know, the rest of the genre, it just tries to imitate The Exorcist, specifically the last 20 minutes where they're doing the exorcism. And it fails to be about something, right? I think that is like, if it doesn't tap into something that's real, then the possession and the exorcism itself is not that scary. To most people, I don't think. Like, I've been grossed out by exorcism movies, but I've not been scared. And this is different, because this is not really about, like, This is one of those cliches where kind of like snooty critics say, oh, it's actually not about the exorcism, it's actually about family or something like that, right? But it's kind of true in this case, right? It's true about this mental state of the mom, right? Who just gets increasingly desperate and increasingly distraught, and who keeps getting worn down by all these strange, like increasingly strange events that start out kind of normal and then get increasingly weirder and more extreme, and then by the end the bed is floating. Like if when like a family member is sick, doesn't have to be a child, but could be anybody, right? It might start off simple, right? It starts off with a cough, or I don't know, they're a bit tired or something, and you don't think much of it, but then it keeps growing, and then at some point you realize something is wrong, right? And I think the whole thing is allegorical for that sensation. And because of that, it's so relatable, and because of that, the human and emotional aspect of it is so real. And that is something that other exorcism movies can't replicate, because they don't understand this. And that includes most Exorcist sequels, I think.
I feel like that's what a lot of like really good movies do. It's never really about kind of what people think they're going there for. It's always this like kind of like underlying story. And like you said, in this case, it's just about a mother trying to like save their child, and then it's just got the Exorcist kind of painting on there. And there's certainly plenty of examples of this. But again, this is like from like doing all of these movies, this is what you kind of learn, is that like the 80s and 90s were a lot better at kind of like doing that. And not to say that modern movies don't do it, but it seemed to be like a core facet of the writing in that time.
I would say good movies do this. Like there have always been good movies and there have always been bad movies, and good movies today still do this. It's just the copycats don't often copy kind of the trappings of it. They don't copy the emotional core of a movie like this. And yeah, I think that's really what makes this work, and that's what makes this stand out. And that's what's so ironic about the fact that it spawned this entire genre that's essentially always retelling kind of the same kind of thing, but none of them really get it. And I kind of wonder why. Like we're not that smart, right? Like, we're not the only people to have figured this out.
Of course.
I'm really like, whenever one of these movies comes out, maybe it's because like it's considered to be cheap and easy. And so if you're like a beginning filmmaker or you have a low budget or something, it's easy to get an exorcism movie made or greenlit or something. I don't know.
I think they misunderstand what the audience. So like whenever there's like, a really popular movie that like, really pops off, I think they always misunderstand the elements of the movie which people liked. And of course, like if you have, say you have like a superhero movie, of course you're going to sell some of those superhero like action figures and stuff like that that come from the movie, but it's not the reason why the people love the movie as much as they did. Of course, like the characters got to be cool, but then there's like this core level of storytelling behind that, which makes people emotionally invested in the story in the first place, to actually then make everything else, make all kind of like the wall paintings pop a little bit more. And like it's kind of just like, it's a good story dressed up in a bit of makeup that appeals to a certain group of audiences compared to something else, because you can tell this exact same story about this parent trying to save their child and probably not make it a horror and like try to make it into a different genre, and it would still have the same type of effect as long as it was done well.
I would say it would still be a horror, but you can do it without the exorcism. You can just make it a mystery illness.
Yeah.
And you have the same emotional core. Anything else that really stood out for you? What did you think about the priest? Like Father Karras? Because we follow him along for quite a while, right? Like he has this whole thing about his job and his friendship with the police detective, and his mother who gets hospitalized and then dies, and like he's kind of really distraught, right? He thinks he's lost his faith, and he's really put through the ringer before the plot even starts. And what do you think about him?
I think he had a good level of complex to this, in terms of like in terms of like the standpoint of like a character in this, because like as you see, you have your like your different institutions, you have your doctors and stuff like that are like kind of like essentially like straight and narrow, and then you then throw in this priest, and again how priests are viewed. They're meant to be kind of not, I wouldn't say holier than thou, but they're meant to be like held up to a certain level within within society at the time. And I felt like it was quite good to kind of get some of the emotional kind of like depth and challenges that he was like facing within himself, actually, which kind of really added to the story. And like kind of sort of, at the end of the movie, you kind of have he's the one that like almost like took over the possession himself and like kind of threw himself out the window at the end, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it kind of, yeah, he was just like a very like interesting, kind of like fascinating character that just kind of like added a good sort of level of complexity to sort of what was going on and sort of to your understanding of sort of what, especially like the Catholic Church, some of the people behind it, some of the emotional sort of turmoil behind it as well.
Yeah, and this whole thing about the institutions is reflected within him, right? He's got all the credentials in the world, right? He's a Jesuit priest. He's a PhD psychiatrist. He's decently senior in the church, right? But then he needs the help of the medical establishment when his mother gets sick. And they too can't help, right? And she's miserable, and she's essentially just being parked in a room somewhere to die. And he can't, and again, he can't help. Right? So it kind of mirrors what goes on with Chris, right? The mother, in some way. Except there it's mundane, right? And at that point there's no demon to cast out.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a sickness, and he still can't help. And all his resource, like, it's not like he's rich, right? Like, as a Jesuit priest, he's not being paid very much, but he's like connected to big institutions, and that still doesn't help.
Yeah. I think as well what you mentioned there, it shows like a nice like circle of life, because you've got this like mother that's like really like caring for their child and like sort of kind of doing everything they can, and then you have the other side of it when sort of life progresses, and of course like your parent gets a little bit older, and then you're also in a situation where for the mother, she knows that the child should have a long life ahead of them, but then for him it's almost like accepting. And like that's why he's probably like kind of like a little bit more accepting of like his mother like passing, is because like she's at that end of life stage. So I actually feel like it's like a cool showing of the sort of two dynamics between sort of parent child in the early stages and like child parents,
and then inverted in the other family,
right?
Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think he's like his whole thing about how he's kind of lost faith in the church, and he's kind of toying with the idea of quitting, and then he gets dragged into this kind of almost fantasy of what a priest is, right? Like, he did not expect to ever do an exorcism. Right, and he starts out thinking it's not actually real. Like, he knows the ritual because it's part of his training, but he doesn't think there's anything behind it. He thinks it's a relic from another past, and then suddenly it becomes his reality because he's kind of pulled into this family.
Yeah, he did also hold strong as well at the end when they were actually doing exorcism, and of course like the demon spirit was like mimicking his mother, and was just like kind of like trying to appeal to him, or like trying to like sway him and kind of manipulate him into sort of stopping the exorcism that was going on. I thought that was like really well done as well in terms of just like him holding strong and sort of kind of like following through in his faith, and eventually did he die at the end? Because what was his hand moving when?
So I mean, he jumped out of the window, right?
And and then wasn't there when like the priest was holding him? I'm sure his hand moved. I don't know. I'm sure his hand was.
I don't think that's the case. So the whole idea is that by dying in that way, there's nowhere for the demon to go. That's the basic idea. Yeah. So we talked earlier about how the movie is not quite what you expect, right? And this movie starts with a Muslim call to prayer. Like, you're watching a movie called The Exorcist, and it starts with a Muslim call to prayer, and the first 20 minutes or so are set in Iraq.
I genuinely thought I was watching the wrong movie. I literally had to double take and make sure I was watching the correct movie, because it has like such strong ties to Christianity. The Exorcism. I was like so confused. I was like, okay, do I have like the wrong copy of the movie playing, or like what was going on there? Like, that completely threw me off at the start of the movie. I'm trying to remember the significance, because like wasn't it the priest that found that sculpture in the desert that they were like kind of like digging for?
So Father Marin essentially leads this, or is part of this archaeological dig in Iraq. And Iraq is kind of the birthplace of kind of demonology. So like, if you go back like 6,000 years, Mesopotamian religion kind of had this whole idea of demons, but it's not quite the way we think of demons. It's more like spirits, gods, and demons were kind of the same thing. Basically, this whole idea of, and I think there's even like some Mesopotamian scripture or something like that on screen, right? Something to the effect of like you serve the lesser evil in order to protect yourself from the larger evil or something like that. And this demon that is mentioned, Pazuzu, is in fact a real Mesopotamian demon. It's got something to do with like it's like it controls the winds or something like that. And people would worship Pazuzu not so much as a god, but more to kind of avoid its punishment or its wrath. Yeah. So this is a real entity that people used to believe in 6,000 years ago. And Father Merrin finds essentially like a statue of Pazuzu. And so first of all, he finds this little statue, right, in the archaeological dig, and then there's also this statue where there's this shot of you've got the statue with the sun behind it, and he's standing on the rubble, and they face each other. Yeah. Right, essentially saying they are enemies and they are opponents, and that is essentially the significance of that he has had run-ins with this demon before, and that he knows this part of his religion, right? He's encountered demons before. He's done exorcisms. He goes out into the world to encounter these things. And that is why they then later bring him in as an expert to do the exorcism. And it ends up killing him, right? Because he's just too old and the demon is too strong. And like the exhaustion of it just ends up killing him. And that's why Karras has to take it over by himself, and he ends up sacrificing himself in order to draw the demon out of Reagan. And he ends up killing himself in order to drag the demon with him. Yeah. Like that's kind of that whole thing.
Yeah. That's actually fascinating. I didn't know about some of the demonology or whatever, like kind of spawning from Iraq. Actually, I think it makes sense. I know in like some like the Muslim religion, you have like things like jinns and stuff like that, which are like.
So this predates Islam by like 5,000 years.
Okay, so yeah.
This is like this is not like Islam is like 7th century, and we're talking about like 3000 BC, that kind of thing. Yeah. But in that region, like there was this practice of worshipping these kind of spirits, demons, gods, and they didn't really make a distinction between those three things. And that is kind of what is dragged up by the excavation, and that is what ends up going after Reagan. Yeah. No, I don't think there's a causal connection, unless I missed something. I think it's just chance that Reagan is targeted by Pazuzu, but that's the connection.
Yeah, no, fascinating. One bit of knowledge that I didn't know before today.
So we've kind of covered kind of the main characters, right? Any other impressions? Anything that jumped out at you when you watched it?
Apart from being completely unsettled and wanting it to be over as quick as possible, I don't think there's anything. This was different from other movies. I was like in just like a state of like uncomfortability the entire time watching this. And if the channel eventually does Exorcist 3, I'd probably sit that one out, because I don't even know what it is about like these like movies in particular, but there's just like certain ones that just get me more than others. Do you know what's so funny is and check out our Smile 2 discussion that will be our previous prior to this, but I was actually after watching that thinking, okay, maybe I'm like not that bad. Maybe I actually am enjoying some horror movies more than I thought that I would. But this is kind of put me back to a level of like, okay, yeah, there's a reason I don't like this genre as much as others.
Would you say that this is more scary, less scary, or just different from other horror movies you've seen? Because like my mantra has always been just you've seen the crap ones, but you haven't. But if you see the good ones, I think you'll think differently. Now that you have seen one of the better ones, do you think differently about the horror genre, like compared to a year ago?
I definitely do. I definitely feel like there's like, definitely like quality in the horror genre. And I definitely feel like I'm like getting better at kind of like dealing with the scares in the genre. I feel like the older ones just have this like extra level of like cynicism to it, because you can like with like the modern ones, you can kind of like see, or you can like kind of understand like the effects and stuff like that. That's like kind of like going behind the horror in modern movies. But I don't know what it is about like the earlier ones, even just like how like old it looks, because like you kind of associate with demons and stuff like that, and like possessions with like with history and like like it coming like years and years ago, and it just feels like, and not to say like 1973 is like hundreds of years ago, but it just kind of feels like a time that's like kind of like come and gone, and I feel like that's why it just kind of hits a little bit different for whatever reason, because you can kind of like see past the budget of sort of modern movies. If you kind of understand what I'm trying to say with that.
I think a lot of modern horror movies are either really formulaic or they focus too much on the aesthetics. Like they focus too much on making the monster look scary, or on the jump scares, or on the scary music, and they don't really get to the core of what's actually scary, right? Because there's no way you actually believe that this is happening, right? No movie in the world will convince you of that, no matter how good it is. But if it reminds you of like a genuine fear that you can relate to, I think that's kind of the back door where it kind of sneaks in and it starts getting to you. And it sounds like this movie did for you. And for me, still, like I actually find The Exorcism the least scary part. Like there's some gross stuff in there, right? But it's like the actually unsettling stuff is the whole thing that we talked about in the first hour. But I think a lot of modern or just average horror movies kind of miss that, and they think you just put in something that looks creepy with some spooky music, and that's your movie. And I think that's where this movie is set apart.
Yeah. No, I agree. Even though some of the modern like stuff kind of does get me sometimes as well. But yeah, no, I do agree. Yeah.
But I think being startled is different from actually being scared. A lot of this movie happens in bright daylight, right? Like the exorcism at the end happens at night, right? In a dark room and everything. But almost all of the initial like first hour or so happens in bright daylight, and it's still unsettling, right? Like there's one kind of stereotypical horror movie scene where the demon is making noise in the attic, right? And Chris is convinced that it's rats. So she kind of, in the middle of the night, is woken up by the noise, and the lights don't turn on. So she gets out a candle and she goes into the dark attic, and she walks around, and then there's a jump scare because like her chauffeur shows up, right? I think that was him, or maybe it was the gardener or whoever, like the housekeeper, somebody. And that is kind of the one sequence that's kind of stereotypical cheap horror movie, right? Because you've got a person walking around in a dark room, and then there's a sudden noise, and it's a fake out because it's just a guy with a flashlight, right? But everything else pretty much happens out in the open, and it shows you what's going on very clearly, like just camera flat on what's going on, and you see everything. And I think that's where it's different from most horror movies.
Yeah, but like you said, you do kind of take more away from this. Past like the cheap thrills and stuff like that, you do take away some of the fear. And I like, it's almost similar to, and you know, it's not a horror movie by any stretch of the imagination, Hellboy, the Crooked Man that we watched previously earlier this year, in the sense that has a lot of like witches and like, and again, it has like elements of like religion sort of kind of like behind it. So even though it wasn't a complete horror movie, I was still completely like weirded out for a few days afterwards, just about sort of like a lot of like the images and a lot of like kind of like what we were like seeing in that particular movie. And I feel like that's kind of what this movie sort of does well as well. It's just like that aspect for me is just what kind of gets me and makes me feel unsettled. Hopefully in a day or so, I'll probably like move past this and completely forget about this and never watch this again.
So you don't think watching it again will make it better because now you know what's happening? I imagine watching this for the first time, you've got this sense of dread because you hear how bad it is and you keep waiting for it. But now that you know what's happening, do you think that watching again would be a different experience?
Possibly. And it's probably not as bad as I, made it. And then I think actually what you said is actually true in terms of like that expectation going into this probably made it sort of 10 times worse as well. And it doesn't help. I was like speaking to some friends about like, eventually watching this, and they were saying that there was like a lot of like superstitious stuff that happened kind of like unsettled to like some of the people that were involved in this. I don't know how much you kind of know of that. I chose not to research it. I was like, you know what? I don't want to know. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to look into it. But I do remember like speaking to some people that are into like horror, and then they were like, yeah, that one just like had like too many real life events happen around the movie as well. But I don't know if you can like speak on that.
I don't know about that. I know that the director is essentially method acting, like where he will try to make it as real as possible for the actors, and that led to some injuries on set as well. but that's more him not having the right kinds of boundaries. But I don't know that, like, there are like movies where people got mysteriously ill afterwards, or somebody died, or during production, or something like that. I don't know that this happened here.
Good to know. I didn't want to find out. I was told it. I was like, I don't want to find out. We just watch this movie, get past it, and then never have to talk about it again. Pretty much. Anything you want to sort of finally touch on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think this is still one of the best movies ever made, at least in its genre. I think it's kind of got this weird reputation where it's simultaneously scarier and not as scary as people say. And I think it just does everything right in terms of how it structured its story and its characters, the way it kind of weaves these different characters and their problems and what they're trying to do about them kind of together to kind of create this kind of unraveling picture of this unraveling tapestry of this demon messing with people and trying to get to them in order to make them despair. Like, there's this scene where the two priests are taking a break from the exorcism, and they are, depending on which version you watch, they have a conversation about what they've been seeing, and one of the priests asks why is the demon doing this, and the other one says to make us despair. And I think that we're seeing that process happen in the characters in different ways. They're being driven to despair and they react to it differently, and they do so in a very human way. And I think because it is so human, and it's not just about putting some characters into like a creepy situation, but it's actually very much focused on the humanity. I think that's why it works, and that's why 50 years later, it's still one of the best and has not really been replicated very much. Like, people have tried, and a few have gotten close, but very little has actually copied this in a way that matters, I think. And I think that makes it special. And even if you don't like horror in general, I think it's interesting on that level, at least.
I agree. So yeah, I don't know. There's that.
Has this made you more or less interested in more horror? You've kind of alluded to it a little bit, but what's the bottom line on? Like, have you reached the finish line now and you're done with horror, or has this made you like, if this exists, what else is out there, kind of thing?
This has pushed me more towards being done with horror, not in a bad way in terms of like the movie was like terrible, but I just like, I don't enjoy. It's like when I'm gonna put this. It's like when people say that they don't like overly spicy food. Like, they can enjoy the food, but then if it's like too spicy, like it kind of ruins the movie for them. And I feel like this is probably what this movie's done for me, is that like it's freaked me out a little bit too much, where I couldn't enjoy the movie enough for sort of what it was essentially. And actually, what I've realized, again, having watched Smile 2, is like I actually enjoy psychological horror a little bit more than sort of kind of like horror, like, you know, your Terrifiers and stuff like that, or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a reason we're not doing a Terrifier.
Yeah, because I don't like kind of like do gore or anything like that. That's just like a step far.
But would you not consider this psychological horror?
In a sense, yeah. If they should have probably taken away the religious aspect of it, and like probably would have been a little bit better with it. In that sense, I would be interested in more that type of horror, more like psychological horror, that avenue of it, as opposed to like anything else, is what I'd say.
All right.
Cool. Well, yeah.
I think that concludes our discussion of Exorcist.
Yeah. Let us know your thoughts down below, people. What are your thoughts on The Exorcist? Is this one of your favorite movies? Did it terrify you like it did me, or do you think it's not as scary and, you know, doesn't have the same impact 50 years later? Whatever your thoughts, leave them down in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Adios.
Bye bye.